Okay. So welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to Let's Talk About Retirement. Richard Haiduck will be sharing his favorite stories from shifting gears. 50 baby boomers share their meaningful journeys in retirement and discusses the myriad ways there are to live as a retiree. For those who'd like to access live closed captions for this event, click on the CC icon in your Zoom toolbar and then click on Show Subtitle. And welcome, Richard. Thank you for coming.
Well, thank you so much, Jenna. I appreciate your efforts in organizing this and San Mateo County Library having this sort of program. It's I think, really nice, both for authors who have something to talk about as well as people who are interested in the topic. What I want to talk about today are not things that I've written, but rather stories that I've gathered. So I interviewed about 75 different retirees and let them go really freeform on what do they see as an important part of this stage of their life. And I started almost every interview with the same question. Tell me about this stage of your life. Tell me what's going on. Tell me what's important to you. And then I shut up and let the tape recorder go and had some amazing stories told by people. But it was very free form, so it created an environment where they could talk about whatever they wanted to. Some of those were really inspiring things and big kinds of things. Some of them were pretty ordinary kinds of things, but that were very important to them. One of the reviewers of the book said this book has everything from the exotic to the mundane, and then went on to say that both are important because people connect with both sorts of things. I think it's interesting too, the baby boomer generation, and I'm assuming a lot of the people in the audience are in that baby boomer generation, had a really wild ride of it. We changed society in a lot of ways. Women's rights came of age, gay rights, Vietnam War protests, various social changes, various economic changes. I think we earned the right to just sit back and relax in retirement and not do very much. And so the question I had going into the book was, will this baby boomer generation continue to be active, continue to break new ground, continue to have a lot of reinventing of themselves, or will they have more of a laid back kind of retirement and say, I've earned it, I'm going to sit back and relax, and I'm going to do the things that I want to do. As you'll see in the stories that follow here, it's both things. Some people went on to a completely new adventure. Other people went to something that was far more relaxing for them. So let me hang on just a second here. So as I talked with people and asked them about what was important in this stage of their life, it kind of fell into 6 different categories. A lot of people were struggling with the question of when to retire. What should be the trigger point? For some people, when to retire was determined by their boss or by some policy, and they said, you're age 65, you're going to retire now. Or there was a big layoff and they had to retire. But for other people, it was more their choice, and they had to figure out when was the right time for them. For some people, where to live was an open question. And maybe they wanted to stay where they were, or maybe they wanted to move closer to their kids. But there were some really kind of gut-wrenching decisions about what changes to make there. For some people, they wanted to keep working a bit. They didn't want to have a full-time job anymore, but they were looking for other things they could do that were more like work in retirement. And for many people, they had new leisure activities or an expansion of the leisure activities that they already enjoyed. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those. There's some people who did some amazing volunteering kind of work and gave back to the community in a way that they hadn't had a chance to do when they were working full time. And finally, several of the people that I interviewed discovered a new spirituality in themselves, not necessarily religious. I use the word spirituality to be a broader term, to really be self-reflective and think about the meanings of those things around them. So let me start with one of the people who thought through his retirement. This guy decided that he wanted to kind of clear his head a little bit and think through what he wanted to do next. So he went on a long walk, several hundred miles, on a trail in France and Spain called the Camino de Santiago. This is a place where they've been quite famous for spiritual trekking and for reflective kinds of things. So this guy and his buddy did this walk. And at one point, they came to the steepest part of the climb. And it was really difficult for them. They were both in their 70s, and it was pretty steep and it was pretty long. And at the top of it was this fairly unusual shaped outhouse. And you can just see it barely scrawled below the icon of the man and the woman is some writing. And in French, it says, "Lift up your head, the hard part is over." And so Rick read that and he says, "Oh, that's absolutely right. We just made it up the highest hill of the climb. We've made it through the hard part." And then he and his buddy talked about it a little bit more, and they said, "No, wait a minute. This was the hardest part of the whole trail. The rest of it's mostly downhill. We've got the hard part of the trail over and done with. So we should lift up our head. The hard part is over." Well, you can see where that's going. The next thing they said was, "Wait a minute, it's even bigger than that. We've worked hard all our lives. We've earned our retirement. We can say for our life, lift up your head. The hard part is over." So this French scribbling across the door of an outhouse on the Camino de Santiago ended up having three meanings for this guy. They made it up the toughest hill, they made it through the hardest part of the trail, but they've also made it through the hardest part of their life and are now entitled to a retirement set of decisions that was more on their own. I want to tell you the story about Steve. Steve was actually based in the UK, really interesting guy. He worked for IBM for most of his career, and he had a very analytical job. And the way he described it was, he kind of reminded me of left brain and right brain. Left brain being where all of your analytical and methodical skills are. And your right brain is where all your creative and interpersonal skills, all those sorts of things reside. And what Steve and his wife concluded was that his life had been a left brain life, his whole working career. And he was good at it. He had good analytical skills. He knew how to be methodical about things. And he had accomplished quite a lot in that career. But he had this kind of epiphany, and he said, "You know what? My right brain, I'm sure I've got one, but I've never used it. I'm gonna use my right brain for my retirement." And so he stopped doing all these analytical, methodical things. And he said, "The first thing I want to do is explore being an artist." And he'd never done that in his life. This was a whole new thing for him. But he said, "I think I might have it in me. I'll start doing some sketches." So he started doing just some pencil drawings. You can see one of them there, quite an interesting drawing that he made. And he posted them on Facebook. And he thought, well, that'll give me some feedback on whether anybody likes what I'm doing. And you can see where this story is going. He got a lot of people, some of whom were his friends, some of whom were complete strangers, liking the pictures that he put up on Facebook. And so he got some encouragement. He says, maybe that right brain of mine does have some skills in it. Maybe I can be a pretty good artist. So he then was offered by an art gallery. They needed a new sign painted out front of the art gallery. And the art gallery said to him, Steve, if you paint the signs for our art gallery, we'll give you a 1-month show, not exclusively him, but a 1-month showing of your materials in our gallery. And he said, well, what do I have to lose? He spent some time, he made a sign, which was kind of not that special, but said what the art gallery was and a little bit about it. And then he put in his latest works, and he put in about a dozen different drawings and paintings that he had done. And Steve, at the end of it, was astonished. They sold very well. He made about $1,500 from this stuff that had been just a hobby to him. And so he got this reinforcement. It was like, my right brain does work. I knew my left brain worked. Now I know my right brain works. So he went on to continue to exercise his right brain. He soon was singing solo in a fairly raunchy bar in Greece, kind of karaoke, except without the background music. He was singing, he had a pianist who was working with him, and now this guy who had been fairly methodical and fairly left brain all of his life is singing in a raunchy bar in Greece and having a great time. He said one thing led to another, and pretty soon the locals in Greece had kind of adopted him, and they went out to the beach and sang all night until sunrise. Now, Steve never told me whether there was any ouzo or other spirits involved in this, but my suspicion is maybe there was a little bit of that too. But my point in all of this is Steve looked at retirement as a chance to do something very different, and something that in talking with him, he said, this is very completing for me. This fills out some things that I never really knew if I could do them. I never really knew if I had those skills. So Steve made this transition from left brain to right brain, and continues to do art and singing and music and all those sorts of things, and is having a great time. So Donna is pictured here on the right, and her boyfriend, who's several years younger than her, pictured here on the left. Donna's an interesting story. She had 4 leg surgeries in her early 70s. So she had 2 hip replacements, 2 knee replacements, and she was walking on a cane for 3 years. But she's a feisty lady. She's very energetic, very aggressive about things. She said to her boyfriend, I'm never going to be in better shape than I can become now. I can work out and get myself fit again, but I've got all new parts. I've got 2 new knees, 2 new hips, and I've been through kind of the rehab. I can get myself strong enough. So she said to her boyfriend, who had climbed several mountains, how would you like to climb Mount Kilimanjaro together? So Mount Kilimanjaro is the tallest mountain in Africa. It's about 19,000 feet, so you get to some really high elevations. It's about a 6-day climb. It starts out fairly close to sea level, and then goes on up to a cold peak that is snow covered. Donna started training. Of course, she told all of her friends about it. She says, this is really important. I'm going to do this. I feel good about this. And her friends said, Donna, you're nuts. You couldn't have done this when you were 20. And Donna said, you don't understand. I'm going to give this my best shot. I'm going to try to do this. So she and her boyfriend started up with part of a larger group, heading up. They made it through several days of the climb. They were at high altitude at the end of the 5th day, And they were feeling the altitude. They had some altitude sickness, especially Donna, not so much her boyfriend, but Donna. And so she had to make a decision. Do I want to make the final ascent on the 6th day, going up in the dark to be there at sunrise at the peak of Mount Kilimanjaro? I won't give away the ending of what happened with Donna, except to say that she's extraordinarily proud of what she accomplished. She feels like this was important to her and rejuvenating to her, that she could, in her early 70s, after 4 surgeries, make an attempt to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. She's just a feisty lady who's fun to talk to. She just feels so good about having reinvented herself in this way. The next story is about Chuck. And retirement has a way of dealing you a hand that sometimes you don't expect. Chuck and his wife had retired in the wine country north of San Francisco. And you can see, you can guess where this story is going. They woke up in the middle of the night one night. The winds were howling. There were about 70-mile-an-hour winds. He smelled, his wife was still asleep, but he was a light sleeper. The howling winds woke him up. He walked out to their front patio door, an all-glass door, and saw the flames kind of racing around their house. So he immediately ran in and woke up his wife. They grabbed the dog, jumped in the car. They got down to a crossroads. They had to decide whether to go right or left. And it was hard to tell because there was smoke and flames and everything. They made a decision to turn right, and they got safely out of the fire zone. And I said to Chuck, that must have really scared you. Your life was at risk. You were threatened by all this. And he said, at the moment, you don't even think about it. You just think, what am I going to do next? He said, afterwards, when I look back on it, it was really a scary experience. But at the moment, it wasn't scary at all. So the house burned to the ground, and this had been their retirement dream house. This was what they had always wanted to live in. And so it was quite a devastating blow to them. What Chuck said, his reaction was not as much disappointment as anger. Why did this happen to me? This isn't fair. I worked all my life so that I could have a pleasant retirement, and then my house burns to the ground. Yeah, I've got insurance. Yes, I'll come out of it okay financially, but my house is gone. I've got to start over in my 70s. Then over a period of time, he began to have a little more perspective about it. And he said, it's only a house. We made it out safely. Some of the people in their neighborhood actually died in the fires. Some of the people had injuries as a result of the fires. He says, after a period of time, it became less anger and more constructive. What do I do now? How do I get back into a retirement place that we want to live? So they made a decision not to rebuild on the same property, but rather to stay in the same area in Santa Rosa, just a few miles from their original house. After this story had been published and the book had been written, I was talking with Chuck, and I knew that there were other fires coming towards their new place. And the story he told me at that point was that they had to evacuate a second time. They had this uncertainty of, is my house going to burn to the ground a second time? And for about 3 or 4 days, they were away from their home, didn't know what was happening, and then later found out that their house did not burn, but the house on each side of them burned to the ground, and theirs remained standing. And he and his wife speculated that maybe the firemen knew that they had lost one house already, and made a special effort to protect their house. But it's hard to imagine, at least for me, what it's like to lose a house and then have the same situation happen again. So volunteering is an area that a lot of people enjoy doing in their retirement. In some cases, it's wanting to give back after enjoying the rewards of a good life. In other cases, it's the camaraderie and the people they're with. There's all sorts of motivations for doing that. So Agnew had a successful career, and at about the same, just a few months before his scheduled retirement, he was diagnosed with prostate cancer. So he and his wife went through this just really difficult time of saying we had all those plans for retirement. We were going to do all these things with our kids and with our friends. We had some travel planned and all that sort of thing. And now all bets are off. So Ag worked very closely with his doctors. He had some excellent decisions made together with his doctors. And his cancer went into remission. And so he, kind of got his life back. As that was all transpiring, he sat down with his oncologist, who he'd become pretty close with. And he said, "You've done so much for me. You've given me my life back. What can I do for you?" And Ag said, in his heart, he was pretty sure what they were going to say. They were going to say, "Well, we need some money for this project we're working on. Can you write us a check?" And he didn't know how he'd respond to that. But that isn't what they said. They said, "Ag, in this community, we need a cancer house." And he said, "What's a cancer house? I don't know what that is." They said, "That's where someone stays while they're being treated and when they don't require hospitalization." So they might spend a few nights in the cancer house and then go into the hospital for an IV administration and then go back to the cancer house for a few days. Or the cancer house may house their spouse or their family while they're getting treatment, either outpatient or inpatient. And in their particular community, there was not a good alternative for the patients. And they said to Ag, "Can you help us get this going and get it organized?" Well, you can see in the picture what happened. This is what's called Jack's House, which is the cancer treatment center in their community. Ag got involved in this, and there was already some community efforts, some people involved in it, some people who knew a bit about it, but they didn't have any leadership. And so he sat with them and he said, "What you really need is a person who is the lead of all of the volunteers and as a paid position so that they're obligated to deliver on this." So he recommended this to them, and then he started thinking about it. He said, "I could do that. I could be the executive director of this project." So he did. He organized the people, he organized the tasks, just like you would do in a business setting. He had all the skills from having done those sorts of things in his business. And he got some people to work on the zoning and some people to work on interactions with the hospital, some interactions with how this would integrate with the treatment plans at the hospital as well. So the physicians were involved in some of the outline of this. And then at a certain point, it became a fundraising issue. That building that you see there in front of you took about $4 million to construct. And so Ag agreed that he would help people organize to do the fundraising. He said, "But we're going to do this in a relaxed way. This is not going to be any arm twisting of the rich people in the community. We're going to have some fun with this." He said the first time the fundraisers got together, the very first question was, "How can I ask somebody for $50,000? I just really feel embarrassed to ask." And he just chuckled and he said, "Well, you're not going to ask him for $50,000. You ask them for 100,000 and then settle for 50,000. So he got these people laughing and energized and confident, and they went out and actually oversubscribed what they needed to have to build the cancer house. What I think is really interesting, when Ag reflected on this accomplishment, he said it was unlike anything he'd ever done in his business career. This is something that was done in a caring way, and also done in a relaxed way, where he didn't have kind of the deadlines on the boss breathing down his neck and all that sort of thing. He did it as a motivated volunteer. And he said, that's a whole different way of operating, and much more comfortable for me in the way it operated. But most of all, I look back on this as the greatest thing I've ever given to society. So for him, this was just delightful. He really got a lot from it, and had just a very rewarding experience, and rewarding for the community as well. So the next story is, I couldn't find a picture with 5 owls. There's actually 5 lifelong friends in this group called Owls. And Owls stands for Old, Wise, Learning Still. So this is 5 girlfriends who have known each other for more than 50 years. They have dinners together with their families. They go camping together. They've actually volunteered at a school together. And they know each other as well as people can know each other. They each have different backgrounds, different interests, and that sort of thing, but their friendship is what joins them together. And in their 70s, one of them said to the other friends, shouldn't we start talking about the end of life? Shouldn't we start sharing our opinions, sharing our views, sharing our wisdom, sharing our challenges, by talking about those things that we can anticipate or that are already happening? And they agreed it would be a constructive thing to try. So once a month, they get together. They've been doing this for a couple of years now. And by end of life, they don't mean just dying, but rather all the other things. So one month they might talk about aches and pains. I don't know about you, but I find aches and pains are a part of this stage of life. And sometimes quite a big part of the stage of life. So they might do aches and pains one time. One month they talked about different spiritual approaches to end of life. One of the ladies has a very strong Buddhist meditation background, and the others are more Christian religions. And they were comparing and contrasting the ways in which end of life is viewed in those various spiritualities. Nothing is off limits. Nothing is required except truthfulness, candor, and no hidden agendas. And because they've known each other for more than 50 years, they know how to talk to each other. In talking with the members of this group, their eyes just lit up. They just said, I've become comfortable that I'm in a time that's going to be changing. I'm in a time when life is going to be different than it was, a few years ago. But I've got my girlfriends together, and we deal with it, and we talk about it. And by talking about it, they said, sometimes we laugh, sometimes we cry, sometimes we're just puzzled by things. But at the end of each of those sessions, they feel like they've risen to a higher level in terms of their ability to deal with things and their ability to get all of the positive things and all the comfortable things moved to the front. So the owls get together and have this discussion and feel like that is an important preparation for them. So one of the things I always try to do in these talks is just present some examples from amongst the 75 people that I've interviewed. But it usually turns out that people have something else they're wondering about in retirement, and something that they want to know, has anybody thought about this challenge, or has anybody had a particular situation like the one I'm facing, and what can be learned from that? So I like to open it up to questions. Jenna can help us coordinate whether those are by chat or by unmuting people. But I'd like to hear your comments, your discussion, things that you're facing, things that you're enjoying. And I'll respond as best I can with the wisdom of the 75 people that I interviewed. So thank you all for listening to me rambling on. Now let's get into the fun part of hearing what you guys want to talk about.
I haven't received any questions yet, Richard, but everyone, if you want to unmute, you are able to ask your question, or if you put it in the chat, I'll read it aloud.
So maybe I'll fill with one other story that's one of my favorites, actually. And it was a guy that was saying, should I keep working in retirement? What should I do there? And he'd been an insurance representative, and he knew he didn't want to do that anymore. He'd kind of had a full career of that, but he said he wanted to do something to keep active. And he said, I think I'm going to be an Uber driver. And this is a guy I know pretty well, and this might be kind of a boring interview, but let's see where it goes. And what could be exciting about being an Uber driver? And he said, first of all, it's ideal work, because you can do as much or as little as you want. You can do it when you want. You can sleep late on mornings when you feel like it. You can work evenings. You can work the hours that you want. You're not going to get rich at it, but it does give you what he described as kind of topping up his income in retirement, so that if they wanted to go out for a nice dinner on Saturday night, working Uber for a day gave them enough money for a nice dinner on Saturday night, or taking a vacation. So the obvious benefits were pretty much there. But he said, that's not why I do it. And I said, Paul, what else would you do? He said, I love to tell people jokes. And when you've got a group of friends and you tell them your jokes, and then you're done. And he said, but not when you're an Uber driver. He says, when you're an Uber driver, the first person gets in your car that morning, you tell them a joke. And they either laugh or they don't laugh. They either like it or they don't like it. And you either did a good job of telling the joke or not so good. And so you kind of learn from doing it. So then you drop that person off. The next person gets in the car. You get to tell the same joke again. You get to improve upon it, embellish upon it. And he said, by the end of the day, he's told the same joke several times. He's gotten at least some of the people to really enjoy it. And he's gotten really good at telling the joke. And he said, that gives me a lift. That lift is probably the wrong word. That gives me an inspiration to keep doing this. He said, there's only one drawback. He said, sometimes I'm telling my wife, boy, I was going along and there was this very pretty girl that I picked up and gave her a ride. And he says, I'm an old guy, it's kind of fun to have a pretty girl in the car. And he said, but then I tell my wife about it, and she says, whatever fare you got from picking up a pretty girl, you're going to give to me as a gift, because you're not going to keep the fares from the pretty girls. So he had to kind of come clean on that. But I think Paul's situation was an interesting one, because he wanted to do something and wanted it to be very flexible, but also very joyful. He wanted it to be something that would be fun for him to do, as well as being something that would qualify as work.
We did get one question from the chat. I can read it aloud. Is there a group that holds sessions about sharing pre-retirement jitters and those who have already retired and talk about what they're doing now?
Yeah, there's a fair number of groups that have discussion. Of course, there's all the social media stuff. Facebook has probably 6 or 8 different discussion groups, life after retirement, kinds of titles. If you just put in retirement as the search word, then you can use social media to discuss. For a lot of people, that fulfills, and you can put a question into the group and then get other people to respond to it. So you get all the social media kind of mileage of doing that. There's another group that's in the Bay Area, both in Berkeley and in San Francisco, called the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. And they offer classes and various discussion groups. I've actually been a lecturer to a couple of their sessions, and these are people who are, this one's maybe a little more academically inclined. What are the studies about retirement? What are the academics around it? There's also a group that is primarily Californian and 100% men, and it's called Sons in Retirement. Sons in Retirement is an amazing group. So they take a community as some sort of defined geography, and they form a group of men to share what they want to do together. So they may have a golfing group as part of their Sons in Retirement thing. They may have a discussion group. They may have a literary group. It's whatever the group members want it to be. They have bocce ball. They have that sort of thing. I also presented to that group in the Bay Area, and one of the things they do, which has not happened to me since then, every guest speaker they write a song about. So instead of doing an introduction that says, well, here's Richard and here's what he's done and that sort of thing, they start singing a song. And the people who write the song, it's sung to the music of some popular song that everybody knows. In their case, they talked about retirement. They talked about my book. They talked about my background. And they did it in a hilarious way. I mean, almost every lyric had some funny joke in it. And that was my intro. I'd never been introed in a song before in my life. And it was really a kick. And the result of the effort of 2 or 3 of their members to do that was that the presentation was immediately relaxed. And it was comfortable, and it was kind of fun-loving, and we ended up having a great discussion about a whole lot of different things. But I will always remember them introducing with a song. Let me just add one other piece to this too. I think that there are a fair number of volunteer opportunities where the predominant volunteer is a retiree. So maybe working in a soup kitchen or something like that, where you're hanging out with people in your peer group, working as volunteers, doing something useful. There's a whole sense of camaraderie and discussion amongst the people who are involved in those sorts of things.
That kind of leans towards our next question anyway. Someone is saying, I've been retired for about 1.5 years now. I'm 75. I have managed to fill my time with various activities such as learning ukulele, gardening, investing in the stock market, reflecting on the meaning of life. But these are not meaningful to me. I'm floundering, especially during the pandemic. Are there any resources that might help me?
One of the ladies in the book actually formed a group to learn ukulele in her 70s. So that's interesting. I think that finding purpose is often instrumental to having, let me put it differently, for some people, finding purpose becomes the kind of pivot point for them. It becomes the thing that makes their retirement special. Um, Giving back allows you to say, I've had a good life. Now it's my turn to give back. It's my turn to do something like Ag did with the cancer house, but not always on that scale. It might be, working in a soup kitchen. It might be mentoring some students. It might be doing something along those lines. But there are several stories in the book of people who found purpose through volunteering. And it really changed everything for them. It changed them from saying, I used to be an accountant, or I used to be an insurance salesman, or I used to be this or that. And now I'm not a used to be. I am a mentor of students, or I am a volunteer helping different people work through their situation. I think, and there's a resource that is very helpful to kind of get an inventory of what's available in your community. So if you go to volunteermatch.org, that's volunteermatch.org, you put in your zip code and it lists every posted volunteering opportunity within your zip code. And for most zip codes, that's 20, 30, or 40 different opportunities. So there's a little bit of everything in there. And if you look at that as a starting point, and you can say, do any of those things feel like they could provide purpose for me and an activity that I would enjoy doing? Now, let me just add one other thing. It's different with COVID. Now let's just operate as if we've still got the full restrictions of COVID, because that's the worst case. There's an awful lot more kind of mentoring and helping using Zoom as a tool. So if you've got a 14-year-old kid who's having trouble in school, they now more than ever need mentoring. Parents are having a hard time with the kids at home if they're trying to hold down their job, that sort of thing. Teachers are doing their best, but it's really hard for teachers to remotely pay enough attention to an individual kid. So in that case, COVID expanded the opportunity to have impact. It expanded the need for kids to get help with their schoolwork. The places that are trying to make sure those kids succeed are really desperately seeking individuals who can do one-on-one time with mentoring. And again, volunteermatch.org would introduce you to some of those, or maybe just going to your local school district and saying, are there some kids I can help out? So that's a long-winded answer to say, my first reaction to how do you fill the space, volunteering can give you that sense of purpose, sense of self-worth, and really meaningful contribution. I think that a parallel to that is some new leisure activity, something that you've always wanted to do. One of the guys in my book said, the thing I've always wanted to do is go fishing every day. And I said, what? And he says, fishing is an intellectual exercise. I said, Rich, you're crazy. Fishing isn't an intellectual exercise. You stand in a river and you throw a fly out there and a fish bites it. He says, no, you don't understand. And he has constructed the way in which he looks at fly fishing as an intellectual experience. And he's learned about the flies, he's learned about the fish, he's learned about the way the river flows. And he's a student, he's an intellectual student of fly fishing. And he goes out almost every day. He says probably 5 days a week he goes out and goes fishing. So he found his thing by looking back in himself and saying, what have I always wanted to do more of? And what have I always wanted to go to a higher level of? So in his case, it was a leisure activity that he'd always wanted to do. But the hard part is finding, as the question kind of reflects, finding what is that fit for you, and kind of seeking it out, and considering what the alternatives are. So I'd say leisure and volunteering are kind of two categories to look at. And I'm rambling on here a little bit, but on the leisure side, being retrospective, looking back and saying, over my life, what was it I always felt that I was missing? What was it I always felt I wanted to do more of? And discovering your fly fishing alternative, or discovering some new hobby, or in one of the cases in the book, he'd always wanted to run marathons, and he chose to do that in his 70s, and had quite an amazing experience. It doesn't have to be, and here's the thing, that the book being a cross-section of the 75 people I interviewed, it doesn't have to be a big thing. It has to be big for you. It has to be big, like the fly fishing was for Rich. That was really important to him. Other people would say, look, that just doesn't resonate for me. You have to find what resonates for you, and what fits with what you want to do, what you're capable of doing, what you enjoy doing. And I'm pretty sure everybody that reads my book is not going to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. I'm pretty sure about that. But that some of the other things that are in the book may have a significant influence on people.
Did get one other question. I don't remember where you are located, Richard, but do you know of any groups in South San Francisco?
Do I have any what?
Any groups that meet, like retirement groups in South San Francisco?
So I'm not aware of anything in South San Francisco. The Osher group, there is, well, SIR probably has a branch near South San Francisco. So for men, I think that would be an alternative. I've really been impressed with that SIR group because it doesn't have a set of rules and a set of structure. It just says, what do we want to do together that would be fun? So it's more around leisure. I'm not sure if they do anything along the volunteer side of things, but that's been a really good one. But I would say the internet is your friend here. You can kind of look and see what you can find, and getting together as a group can be really helpful.
Do you have any suggestions for maybe like search engines they should use? Because I was thinking maybe Nextdoor might be a good option because it would be local. They can sort of make a post there, or anything else that you can think of?
Yeah, Nextdoor is a great one. There's an awful lot of kind of tight community interaction there, and an awful lot of retirement age people participate in Nextdoor. So I'd say that's a good one. Yeah, I'm kind of drawing a blank in terms of things other than what we've talked about so far.
If you think of it, and if you email it to me, I can send it to the group too.
Yeah. I think the other part, although social media doesn't give you the geographic focus, or generally doesn't give you the geographic focus, in terms of the breadth of experience that you can have in one of the Facebook groups, and sharing a question with those groups, the answers may not come back tailored to South San Francisco, but they may come back in a way that's tailored to what you were asking. I've been really, I was not much of a social media user prior to the book, and I've really been reassured about the value of the interactions that happen there, and the amount of people helping people. There's a whole bunch of people who have gone through an awful lot of different retirement experiences, and they're very willing to spend the time to share them. And then a lot of those people go on to have one-on-one relationships with the people that they meet in a larger group setting.
Do you have any tips for like keyword searches, like just, retirement groups or retirement gatherings or?
Um,
Yeah, that doesn't-
so I'd start looking in the mirror and say, what is it within retirement that's most interesting for you? So if you were interested in retirement leisure activities, there's your search words. If you're looking for retirement groups, there's your search word. If you're looking for retirement volunteering, there's your search word. Um, uh, uh, if you want to write a book as a retiree, um, writing a book as a retiree is your search phrase. And there'll be a bunch of answers to that one. And a lot of the people I've run across are pretty active in sharing their views on that. But I think there's a kind of first step in all of this that maybe I haven't been as clear about. You kind of got to start with looking in the mirror. You kind of got to start and saying, what have I got? What do I want? How does this relate to me? Not what can I learn about retirement, but what do I need to learn about retirement? What are my interests? What are my passions? What are my limitations? What are the things I really don't want to do? In the case of Steve that we talked about earlier, he looked at himself very analytically, very methodically. He's a left brain guy. He probably had a list a mile long of all the things that were him. And he came to this remarkable conclusion that he wanted to learn about his right brain. And he wanted the creative side of himself to come out. And he did it in spades. And he's as happy as he can be. But he started with himself rather than something more generic than that. And he didn't start by saying to a group, what do you think I should do? He started with himself and with a lot of support from his wife as well to say, what fits for me? What's important for me? The group I just mentioned, the Owls group, for them, what was important was understanding the next stage of life. And they did it. And it's really been very cool for them.
We've got one last question. I think we have time. If you care to share, I'm curious about why you wrote this book. Did it change your retirement focus, and is writing a new retirement project for you? Maybe something about your background.
Yes. It's an interesting question. When I was a 7-year-old kid, I wanted to be an author. And I started down that path. I was writing short stories every day. I'd write a story almost every day. It was never longer than a page. It never had much of a plot. It never had much of a character, but I'd do a story almost every day. And then almost as rapidly as it started, it just stopped. I turned another year older and decided I didn't want to do that anymore. Then about 65 years later, I was talking with a friend of mine who said, I've never really shared this with you, but I was in the Senior Olympics a couple of years ago. And I said, Dave, I've known you for years. You've never said that. And he said, well, I was kind of humble about it. And he went on to tell me about it, and he won a medal and he had a great experience. And I said, that story people would love to hear that story. And he says, yeah, but I'm kind of shy about talking about it. Then almost randomly over the next couple of weeks, I had 2 other experiences like that of somebody that I had known, but had not known about something really cool they were doing in their retirement. And I had this kind of moment where I said, those stories may be illustrative to people at this stage of life, hearing what other people are doing, what they're going through, what they like and dislike, what their challenges are, what their opportunities are. So I kind of made a deal with myself. I said, I think this could be a book, but I only want to do it if 2 things continue to be true. The first is, like a retirement project, it has to be fun. If it stops being fun, then I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do this as a punishment in my retirement. I'm going to do this as a part of the joy of retirement. And I got into it, and it became more and more fun the deeper I got into it. And then the second thing was that it had to feel like a book. It had to feel like something that was going to contribute to people at this stage of life, that they'd get something from it. They'd learn some new perspective, and they'd have some reason for looking at themselves in a different way. And as I got into the interviews, as I met a lot of people I'd never met before, both things became true. The interviews were an absolute kick. Just hearing people telling their favorite stories about what's going on in their life at this stage was really enjoyable. And some of those people have become very close friends as a result of people I'd never met before. But I think also the number of people who have contacted me now and said, I was trying to figure out my retirement. I was trying to reset it a little bit. I'm about to retire and I'm trying to figure it out. The number of people who have said, not all of those stories resonated for me, but there were a few that hit exactly what I was thinking about and really added to my way of thinking. So I think on that second criteria of it being a book that is helpful for people, I think it is achieving that.
This last one isn't a question, but someone just shared, another great place to explore is meetup.com. I don't know if you've used that too.
I'm sorry, it's what?
Sorry, meetup.com. Someone mentioned it.
No, I haven't used that one, no.
I know I've used it for the library to post our events, but yeah, that's a good idea. Thank you. Looks like.
So I hope this has been helpful to the group. I appreciate the good questions. And Jenna, thanks again to you for organizing all this and making it all flow smoothly. I appreciate that a lot. And if the book again is Shifting Gears, 50 Baby Boomers Share Their Meaningful Journeys in Retirement. It was just recently released in audiobook. It's been out as a print book for a few months now. And if you want to connect with me directly, I have a website, richardhaiduck.com, and you can leave messages there for me, and I'll be glad to get back to you. It also gives a little bit more of the background about the book and a little bit of, and there's several blog posts there as well on different topics around retirement.
I've just put Richard's website in the chat, so feel free to bookmark it if you want to.
Okay.
And I guess we can finish up. Thank you so much, Richard. And yeah, great stories. Thank you for all the expertise you shared.
Okay, glad to do that. Thank you so much, Jenna. And thank you all for participating.